Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Madalito Jaflumira, the research consultant of the Agri-PDB platform hosted by IFAD. We're happy today to welcome you to today's webinar titled Stabilizing Food Systems in the Poly Crisis, the Countercyclical Role of PDBs during the Persian Gulf Crisis. This is the first session that focuses on countercyclical role of PDBs, and our network has grown tremendously. Today, we feature PDBs from East and Southern Africa, as well as Latin America. At the Agri-PDB platform, we believe that PDBs play a pivotal role in the financial ecosystem when they're backed with the right macroeconomic system. Given this importance, PDBs provide financing during economic downturns and continue to deliver on development mandates such as food security, soil health, and climate resilience. The platform recognizes the need to foster such dialogue, learning, and shared experiences on coping with such shocks. This subject matter has been a core point of discussion in our steering committee, which met earlier this year, and saw it relevant to advocate for the role of PDBs. Today, we have a wide range of esteemed panelists who bring a holistic view on this issue. I welcome Sandra Martin from Bond UK, who is part of the steering committee, and she also leads the work on sustainable economic development and global reforms at Bond UK. Sandra will be steering the conversation today as the moderator. Sandra, thank you once again, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me and inviting me to moderate this really timely discussion, I think, on a very important issues and really fantastic panel and great collaboration as we speak now. So before we get into the core thing about discussing this really crucial issues, just three practical points. I just ask all speakers to stick with the time. I'll mention how much you have, and I will give you a notification when it's time to wrap up. Also, I think there will be a speaker also talking in Spanish later on. So again, make sure that you have your language captions switched on if you need. And then also really for all attendees and also speakers of this webinar, you're very welcome to use the Q&A box and chat box to post questions so that when we get to the Q&A session at the end, we have all them ready. So keep them all coming and we keep the lively discussion. Right, so now I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Pieter-Nel Bogaert. She is a Managing Director of Office of Technical Delivery at IFAD. She has long-term experience in private and public sector working on international finance, banking, development, agriculture, and food systems management, and private equity. Her speech will outline the general crisis context and emphasize the relevance of public development banks in crisis response. Pieter, we are honored to have you with us today, and the floor is yours for about 5 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you so much, and the honor is completely mine to be part of such a large platform. I already see, I think, 86 participants, so that's really already a success. And I know also the platform has a large number of members, so I'm really happy that IFAD is hosting this. So thank you for being here, and it's indeed a critical moment for global food systems for many topics, but today particularly for food systems. Food security is of course determined by the agricultural production, the availability of crops, but in turn it is very clear to everybody, also to people who are not into agriculture. Everybody has learned over the last couple of weeks about fertilizers, fossil fuels, and the importance of that, and how much we depend on energy markets and fertilizers and finance to make food. A disruption at such a single strategic choke point such as the Strait of Hormuz has a short-term, but unfortunately also a long-term effect for households worldwide. We already know this as a given. The new planting season has begun in many parts of the world, and so we don't see it in the prices of food today because we're still eating from the harvest already done. But for the coming harvest, to put it simply, The high income input costs and the tight liquidity foresees that farmers will plant less or apply fewer inputs, and as a result, there will be lower yields and less food. But the other effect is that higher energy prices also incentivize farmers to grow more biofuel crops, diverting yields from food markets as well. So scarce food availability and higher food prices strain food security and rural livelihoods as well. And to make things worse, farmers do not only face challenges on securing input supply, but also on adopting more resilient, productive, and sustainable farming practices. This is especially important now that predictions are that this year's El Niño weather effect will be stronger than ever, which will have a negative effect on crops production and food security as well. But there's good news as well, in the sense that there are regenerative approaches that are crucial and can provide long-term solutions by strengthening farmers' capacity to cope with more volatile and exasperated weather patterns. Integrated soil and fertility management, better agronomic practices, and the promotion of bioparts are already part of IFAD's development and resilience agenda. But there's also a clear need for the public development banks on this point. The PDBs, to shorten it, can support farmers in transitioning to a more sustainable production and especially de-risk local banks to create more access to finance as well as insurance for farmers. We've actually see that happening already. When private capital flows contracted and commercial lenders withdrew from agricultural markets during the COVID-19 pandemic, the agricultural PDBs expanded their lending, mobilized guarantees, and sustained credit to farmers and businesses. So PDBs make the difference by acting countercyclically. For today's and future crises, PDBs can step in to share risk with the private sector and support governments in avoiding distortionary responses that amplify global shocks, but also address deeper structural vulnerability exposed by this crisis. Investing in, as I mentioned, diversified fertilizer supplies, low carbon production and regenerative approaches, and agroecology. As such, the role of agricultural PDBs has two important dimensions. For the short term, stabilizing the present by protecting production livelihoods and improving access to credits when shocks like this hit. For the longer term, financing the transition that reduces exposure to the next shock. So this learning event convenes together guests from IFAD, from IFPRI, the Agroecology Coalition, and public development banks to review the evidence, to share experiences, and discuss coordinated financial responses from BDPs for immediate stabilization needs as well as longer-term resilience. So I'm very happy that this is taking place and with your contributions, and I wish you an engaging and productive discussion on this important topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your welcoming remarks. And really, I think we all share the excitement about this discussion, and hopefully we go away with really tangible actions what we can take collectively. As our next speaker, I would like now to introduce Joseph Lauber. He's a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute, and is also a former chief economist at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Floor is yours, Joseph. And if you have sharing, then please.
Yeah, I am. Let me try to find that. Yeah, no, thanks very much. I'm very delighted to be on this program, and let me ask, can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
You can maybe make it in from the beginning. I think it will go in a slide mode, the presentation mode.
Yeah, it's in. Unfortunately, it's in presentation mode at my end. So.
But yeah, we can see it. It could be just a little bit maybe broader, but if you maybe click on the from beginning, I think that could probably do that.
Okay. So do you have the title page up?
Yeah.
Okay, so unfortunately I can't see what you're seeing. I see full presentation for me. Can I proceed?
Sure.
Okay, so sorry, and I apologize. It seems like every time I'm on a new platform, there's another technical issue. So I apologize for that in advance. And I will try to be very quick here. We have been tracking this crisis since the beginning, and again, I think there's a lot of similarities to the previous crises we've seen. There's also some differences, and I'll try to discuss those very briefly here. Obviously, the Gulf is a very important producer of oil and energy and other energy products like liquefied natural gas, but also key in nutrients, so nitrogen, phosphate, fertilizers, and then also sulfur, which is an important component for phosphate fertilizer production. We've seen almost a total decline over the last few weeks since the attacks began, and in particular over the last month or so, as we've had blockades by both U.S. and Iran, which has prevented almost all ships from getting through. That's resulted in obviously very, very high prices. We've seen energy prices, oil prices go well over $100 a barrel, $110 a barrel. Unfortunately, none of this seems to be getting better. Urea prices, for example, are almost double what they were pre-crisis, and all this is having reverberating across the world, not just for those who buy from the Gulf, but also because these are global markets. Also, prices are very, very high, and the chart shows that we've seen again very similar spikes in previous crises. I'd say one of the differences here is that grain prices and other prices are not following right now, and that creates.
Sorry, can I just interrupt you quickly? We can't. I think all of us we can see only the front page. If I'm okay.
Okay, can we, Anais? Can you do you have the ability to share the screen from there?
Okay, thank you so much.
And I apologize. This is
no, don't worry. It's okay.
I can talk fast, but that doesn't mean that I can show my slides. Okay, and if you can just yeah, so next slide, please. And then we'll go right into the next slide. So again, compared to, say, the 2022 crisis, if you look at energy and fertilizer prices, they've made very, very similar movements to what we saw following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The difference is that the grain prices have not climbed nearly as much, particularly in the first 3 weeks or so. We have seen wheat prices come up in the last couple of weeks, largely because of droughts in the U.S. That are emerging, but the rice market, for example, prices are still quite low. It was mentioned at the outset that there's a potential very significant El Nino event at the end of the year. I'll get into that later. That all could change this, but the good news for the moment is that crop prices are actually quite subdued in comparison. The one exception being soybean oil, which again is tied, much as was mentioned earlier, to high energy prices through biofuels. Next slide. So I'm not going to go through this. It's just I have a paper on this that we've published at IFPRI, but it just shows how this crisis is largely a supply-driven crisis. It's really hitting key energy input markets and not so much on the demand side. So we don't have the big spikes in biofuels that we saw. We don't have big spikes in demand from China, all of which we saw in the 3 previous big price spikes. Next slide. Again, biofuel production, the good news is that's largely flattened a bit, but you are seeing already countries talking about ramping up biofuel mandates. In the U.S. right now, they're talking about increasing ethanol penetration from 10% to 15% in the fuel supply. You have countries like Indonesia that are moving toward 50% biofuel blends. All of those will have important over the longer run, have important impacts on feedstock demand for things like soybeans or rapeseed or maize and wheat. Next slide. The other big thing is China. China demand, which was really growing rapidly throughout the 2000s, has begun to slow in the last 2 or 3 years. That's, again, good news from the sense that we don't have the big demand pressures that we saw even during 2021, 22. Coming out of COVID, there was big increases in demand in China, both for grains and oilseeds. That has not occurred. That's, again, that's a dampening or won't exacerbate the situation, at least for the time being. Next slide. And the overall grain and supply outlook actually is quite good. We do have some dry spots. I mentioned the U.S. For wheat, and we have seen the crop production report came out yesterday that showed the wheat production, winter wheat production, is the lowest in many, many years, and that will have some positive impact on prices over the short run. But overall, these numbers are taken out of GeoGlam, out of the and published in the Amos report, showing basically fairly large, good growing conditions. Overall, global stocks situation also is quite good, and that's also a good news as far as the prices are concerned. Next slide, please. Again, the concern here is high fertilizer prices and what that will mean for one crop choice, whether or not farmers will switch to less fertilizer intensive crops. In the US, for example, I think we're expecting less maize being produced, more soybeans being produced. Some of that, you see similar cropping choices in Europe. In other areas of the world where there may be fewer cropping alternatives, the real question is, will the fact that we see high fertilizer prices mean that we'll see lower application rates? We did see lower application rates in 2022. It was down particularly for phosphates and potassium. Potash is not an issue this time around. But certainly phosphates are. Nitrogen, the price impacts are a lot larger this time. And I think key global prices for food and feed grains are quite low. So again, the margin for producers are much tighter than they were in 2022. I think where the problems will really, if we see the big problems, it's going to be in the second half of the year, primarily Southern Hemisphere, primarily in second, third crop seasons of rice in areas like South and Southeast Asia. At least going into the spring plantings in the Northern Hemisphere, most countries have had pre-positioned fertilizer grains. So that's at the global level. At the local level, if you're a poor country, developing country that may be importing fertilizer, you're obviously seeing much higher prices. And I think there we will see some negative impacts. Next slide. We don't have time to get into this, but just remember that what isn't getting out of the Persian Gulf also means that there's a lot that's not getting into the Persian Gulf, and the area is highly dependent on imports to meet food aids, and that doesn't just mean those countries within the Gulf itself, but countries like Afghanistan and World Food Program and others have been very clear about what those issues entail. Right now, it's very difficult to get grain in overland to Afghanistan without going a very circuitous route to avoid the Gulf region. Next slide. My biggest concern short run is actually in food inflation, and that's largely because of high energy prices, in the sense that the prices that we're seeing, energy is a very large component of overall retail food prices, so what consumers pay, not so much what a farmer receives for his product, but what consumers pay, those prices are going to be higher, not because of wheat prices are higher or rice prices are higher, but rather because getting that rice from the farm or the port to a community means a lot of transportation costs, a lot of processing costs that embody a lot of energy. And that's the real short and medium term concern I see. That typically takes a few months to really get into the overall inflation picture, but that's something that certainly we've gone through a big bout of food inflation over the last several years from 22 onward. It had just begun to come down over much of the world. Now I fear that this will reignite that. Next slide. And here I'm just going to close out by saying I think that we're, here we are over 11 weeks into this crisis. We're looking at now prospects of even longer closure of the strait. I think that does begin to really push a lot of other concerns that I have on will this increase biodiesel production and other biofuel production, which then could bring in these demand components that I said at the outset were less intense than they were in, say, 2022 or in other previous periods. And then export restrictions. The fertilizer market is unlike wheat, where there's a lot of wheat grown in the world. You can find other suppliers like we did in 2022. With fertilizer, it's a very small a number of countries. I have a paper that I'm going to put out. We'll put out later this week or early next week on just the overall impact of what these export restrictions mean, and I think that's something very key to watch over the months to come. And then obviously El Nino and droughts could really bring really intensify this and really bring food prices into this whole mix. And with that, I apologize for going so long and apologize for the technical difficulties, but let me close out there.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was really, really insightful. I think you were making references to a few articles, what you have written. So if there's anything you can maybe share in the chat for everyone, that might be, I think many will appreciate. Thank you so much.
I will do so.
Thank you so much. As our next speaker, let me introduce Carola Alvarez. She's Managing Director of the Office of Development Effectiveness at IFAD, and she'll talk about implications for rural communities and the role of IFIs in responding to the crisis. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for the invitation and for sharing everyone's experience in managing this crisis and monitoring it as well. Joseph has just walked us through the supply chain mechanics, and I want to take one step further downstream to the farm gate, to the household, and to the people IFAD works with, because the pathways through which this crisis reaches rural communities are very specific, and they're already in motion. And some of the worst effects are still ahead of us, as Joseph has mentioned. The immediate transmission channel is input cost, as Joseph has already mentioned. When fertilizer prices spike, smallholders face a stark immediate choice: either absorb costs they cannot afford, cut application rates, shift to less input-intensive crops, or sell productive assets to stay afloat. Our impact evaluation to the 2022 Ukrainian food shock found that more than 70% of participating households reported higher input pricing after the onset of the crisis, while fewer than 1 in 5 saw corresponding increases in the prices they received for their output. So the asymmetry is structural, not incidental. Input cost shocks pass through to smallholder faster and more completely than output price increases do. Any reduction in input translates into yield losses and erodes the productive base needed for recovery. Critically, those yield losses materialize with a lag of 1 or 2 seasons. Already mentioned by Joseph, the full impact of those decisions made today will be felt most acutely in food availability and prices in late 2026 and in 2027, not now. So the crisis is not only what we're seeing today, it is what is being set in motion today. And that is, one of the salient aspects of this crisis, I think. A second and often overlooked channel is remittances. Millions of households across South Asia, East Africa, and West Africa, precisely the regions most exposed to this crisis, depend on income transfers from Gulf-based migrant workers. And as GCC economies contract and employment conditions tighten, those remittance flows are already under pressure. And for rural households, remittances are not a supplement to agricultural income. They are frequently the primary buffer that allows families to purchase input, smooth consumption, and avoid distress asset sales. Their disruption compounds everything else. So this is the context in which the concept of resilient value chains becomes operational for us. As one value chain that not simply one that generates income under normal conditions, but one that is designed and governed to present its core functionality when disruptions occur without collapsing, excluding small vulnerable participants. So building such value chains requires deliberate investment and three interconnected properties. One is their ability to maintain consumption and avoid irreversible distress strategies, which were alluded before. Two, the ability to sustain viable yields while protecting soils, water, and biodiversity. And third, the continuity of input supply, finances, logistics, and market access for smallholders and rural SMEs under stress. Our impact assessments have been unambiguous on one point. Income gains alone do not build these functionalities, right? So interventions that generate measurable income growth under normal conditions repeatedly fail to protect rural households when a shock hits, unless they have also integrated climate adaptation, diversification of income and production, access to liquidity and insurance, and targeting grounded on context-specific vulnerabilities. Our evaluation makes this concrete. For example, in Afghanistan, where we have quasi-experimental evidence, additional project exposure produced significant improvements in animal health practices, market participation, and productive asset ownership. But we had no statistical significant effect on total income. As the evaluation would note, production and resilient gains materialize before income effects do, particularly in systems where returns accrue gradually. So resilient value chains are built deliberately, or they're not built at all, and they cannot be constructed once a crisis is already underway, which is the case now. So what can PDBs do? The risk that these livelihood impacts will become permanent. The hard-earned development gains will be erased faster than they can be rebuilt. And that is precisely what calls for PDBs to act, one, countercyclically, specifically in 5 dimensions. One is liquidity, another is inclusion, agroecological transition, supply chain investment, coordination. However, these responses, we need to think of these responses in different timeframes. For the immediate stabilization, which is from now to 6 months, these 3 actions that are most critical that we found are emergency input financing, so direct targeting financing to ensure smallholders can access fertilizers and other critical inputs for the current planting season before the yield loss is completely locked in. Liquidity support to prevent distress asset sales, so flexible credit lines, repayment moratoria, and emergency working capital allows farmers and rural SMEs to stay operational rather than selling productive assets, right? And the third is helping governments avoid distortionary responses, which in many places are already in place. Export bans and broad and targeted input subsidies are already proliferating across several affected countries, understandably so given the political pressures, but they create huge distortionary responses and high fiscal strain. Attention in this timeline is that crisis finance is under enormous pressure to move fast, while good design, targeting, vulnerability assessment, safeguards takes time. So the honest answer is that both matter and neither can be fully sacrificed for the other. Thus, investment in preparedness mechanisms before the shock is the only way to resolve it or to work towards having those mechanisms in place for the next shock. So that brings me to timeline number 2, which is the structural transition, the medium to long term. Modern agricultural structural dependence on fossil fuel fertilizers and energy-intensive logistics is not a natural condition, as Peter Nell, at the beginning alluded to. It is the outcome of decades of investment choices. So, looking ahead, PDBs and IFIs can help reverse it or think about how to reverse it. One is to de-risk the transition to sustainable inputs. Current fertilized shocks is simultaneous disruption and an opening. We can finance the adoption of biofertilizers, integrated soil fertility management, and diversify lower carbon fertilizer productions. Second, redirecting agricultural finance towards agroecological systems. So colleagues from the Agroecology Coalition will speak to this in more depth. But from an evaluation standpoint, the evidence on agroecological approaches as a resilience strategy is very robust and increasingly becoming more robust. So PDBs can have a specific role in making these approaches bankable or financeable. So I just want to wrap up saying, one tension worth naming, it's that in an acute food production crisis, pushing a rapid shift in input systems can conflict directly with the immediate imperative to maintain output for the 2026 and 2027 season. So the timeline number 1 and the policy responses that I mentioned need to be carefully balanced with timeline number 2 and its objectives in terms of structural transition, which is urgent but cannot be front-loaded at the cost of this season's harvest. So finally, I just want to say that PDBs can bring capital and risk appetite, and IFIs like IFAD can add evidence on what works, targeting tools grounded on field experience, and the ability to support governments in designing responses that protect inclusion. Our evaluations make the inclusion challenge very concrete. Female-headed households were 14% points more likely to experience food insecurity than the overall sample in the Ukraine shock. They consistently reported smaller welfare improvements across indicators in the recovery phase. So crisis finance that does not actively correct for these structural disadvantages will systematically underserve those most at risk. So that's where design quality and gender-sensitive targeting are not just secondary considerations. They will determine who actually benefits and how fast they can recover. In closing, I'd like to say that unfortunately, we believe that the Persian Gulf crisis is not a temporary disruption that will resolve itself. It's an accelerated stress test of the structural vulnerabilities that we have allowed to accumulate in the global food systems. So PDBs have both the mandate and the demonstrated capacity to act over those structural vulnerabilities. The question, and I hope that is what we explore in this dialogue, is whether we will do so in ways that are fast enough to prevent the immediate damage, well-designed enough to avoid creating new distortions, and forward-looking enough to reduce the vulnerability that will otherwise make the next shock equally damaging. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carola. I think you made many really, really good points, which I hope we can now probably elaborate a bit more also in a Q&A session, especially in what needs to happen. And I think you gave, quite a few already good ideas of what needs to happen. And yeah, that's what we can discuss also with the representatives of banks, how we really accelerate that progress. Right, so now I'd like to invite our next speaker, who is Oliver Oliveros, who is Executive Coordinator at the Agroecology Coalition, and his contribution will frame the agroecology transition as a key resilient response to agri-food systems polycrisis. We already heard mentioning agroecology by previous speakers, so I think this is a nice deepening of that and solution-focused conversation going forward. So please, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Sandra. Can you hear me? Wonderful. And
Yes,
indeed,
yeah.
what has just been mentioned is a very good introduction and a way to really strengthen the case that agroecology is as a resilient response to the crisis, actually polycrisis, right? Because we know that the current food systems are not sustainable. We all know this. It's producing 1/3 of greenhouse gases, responsible for 80% of biodiversity losses. And is also eating up or using up 70% of fresh water resources. It continues to pollute the soil and air and water. It's very much vulnerable to climate change, but it is also the current agriculture is also a solution to climate change. At the same time, the current system, which is not sustainable, is not addressing the triple burden of malnutrition, and it's maintaining social inequity and loss of cultural values. On top of this is a various crisis that we are experiencing right now. And you could see here on the screen also a diagram which demonstrates some of the different lock-ins that preventing that change to happen, right? A study by IFPRI, for example, among many others, is really pointing out those different issues that are blocking the way. But this is also where agroecology really comes in. It represents a fundamental approach. It represents a fundamental approach to food systems transformation. And let me just result one. It represents a fundamental approach to climate change mitigation and adaptation, to biodiversity conservation and sustainable use, to sustainable land management, and it goes beyond this one-size-fits-all solutions to create resilient systems that are capable of withstanding multiple environmental shocks simultaneously. And unlike industrial models based on resource-intensive monocultures, agroecology integrates ecological, social, economic principles to ensure that food security is sustainable. And it also takes into account context specificity, particularly in conditions that are increasingly becoming unpredictable, let's say. And agroecology is based on a set of principles and elements, making it truly transformative and sustainable approach. And resilience is one of these. In agroecology, resilience is the capacity of agroecosystems, households, and communities to withstand, recover from, and adapt to external shocks and stresses, such as climate change, pest outbreaks, or economic crisis, while maintaining key functions and improving livelihoods. It acts as sort of like an integrative features that links, as I mentioned earlier, ecological, economic, and social dimensions. And it offers several opportunities to stabilize food systems in a context of polycrisis. Sustainable practices, for example, implementing agroecological approaches, cover crops, crop rotation, polycultures, can improve soil health and reduce susceptibility to diseases. It incorporates ecological principles into farming practices, forming biodiversity, fostering sustainability and different ecosystem services. The second one is that it promotes ecological diversification. So by using practices like intercropping, agroforestry, farms become less susceptible to single point failures, such as specific pest outbreaks or extreme weather events. It is also, the third feature is that it reduced input dependency. So agroecological systems focus on nutrient recycling and soil health, minimizing the need for synthetic fertilizers. And this protects farmers from price spikes and supply shortages that are caused by global conflicts. We've seen it in the past and we're seeing it now. Agroecology is also promoting local food networks, a shorter supply chains such as community-supported agriculture, reduce vulnerability to global logistic disruptions. Think about COVID, right? And then the sixth one is about social and traditional knowledge. Integrating indigenous knowledge with modern science empowers local communities to develop site-specific solutions that are more effective during humanitarian crisis. And then lastly, but not the least, is this food systems governance. Strengthening food systems governance by including and empowering smallholder farmers, fisher folk, and other workers in the food supply chain can promote real transformation towards sustainability. After all, agriculture and food systems, it's not just about production. It is not disassociated from social development issues that are, facing the world today. And as I said, we've seen that during the COVID period. We have seen it before, and agroecology has proven highly effective in stabilizing food systems during various global and local crises. Unlike industrial farming, which may collapse or can collapse when external supply chains fail, these systems use local biological diversity to absorb shocks. And then in COVID-19 pandemic, local solidarity-based partnerships for agroecology were often more effective at maintaining food access when global commercial chains fail. The pandemic exposed the fragility of the globalized food chains. I mean, in Latin America, in Europe, and many other parts of the world, agroecological-based systems adopted more quickly by territorializing production. In Latin America, for instance, informal agroecology movements established new producer-consumer partnerships and short food chains. So these local networks ensured food access for urban centers when large-scale logistics were paralyzed by lockdowns. And in climate shocks and other environmental disasters, evidence from projects from the Global South shows that restored agroecological landscapes stabilize productivity even during droughts or floods. In Ethiopia's Gamo Highlands, for example, farmers maintain over 50 plant species, including hundreds of varieties of NSAID, these are false bananas, and 40 varieties of barley. So this high agrobiodiversity ensures that even if one crop fails due to weather, others survive, and therefore that allows to maintain food security. In Malawi and Zambia, these countries successfully introduce or reintroduce cassava to replace water-intensive maize. Because cassava is drought-resistant and can be harvested year-round, it serves as a critical food reserve during prolonged dry spells. Following Cyclone Idai in 2019 in Zimbabwe, agroecological farmers used community-led seed banks and fairs to rapidly exchange local seeds. This social solidarity enabled a much faster recovery of food production than reliance to other types of aid. You will recall in 2015 monsoon in Myanmar, after this devastating landslide and floods that destroyed traditional fields, several projects like a Strong Project introduced farmer field schools to help communities restore infertile lands using agroecological techniques. In Sicily, during the water crisis 2023-2024, when they faced severe drought of nearly losing 2 billion in agricultural damages, subnational initiatives are shifting towards agroecology to maintain water, to manage water more efficiently and reduce the need for expensive and low quality imported grains. Ukraine conflict and input crisis, the war that highlighted the fragility of fertilizer-dependent systems. Agroecology's focus on circularity offers this de-risking pathway for regions that were facing high agri-inputs. In Angola, for instance, particularly in conflict-affected or high-poverty rural areas, projects like the smallholder resilience enhancement programs focus on rainwater harvesting and drought-tolerant crops. So this reduces dependence on external aid and protects farmers from global price spikes of synthetic fertilizers caused by geopolitical conflicts. And there is a growing evidence, as the previous speaker already mentioned, that agroecology works. I mean, here you can see on the screen are just some examples of scientific publications that shows a positive socioeconomic performance with the use of agroecological practices, some positive outcomes on food and nutrition security of households in low and middle income countries, or the effects of agroecology in terms of enhancing resilience and promoting sustainable agriculture, including climate adaptation and mitigation. And there are also a growing evidence in terms of practice. I mean, you certainly have heard about Andhra Pradesh community managed natural farming, where 1 million smallholder across 4,000 villages covering 500,000 hectares has resulted to higher crop diversity, increase in incomes, but also increase in yields. Biodynamic farming in Egypt, for instance, has also led to the transition from conventional to more profitable biodynamic regenerative farming while supporting community development. And many other examples. And if you just look at IFAD portfolio on the project that have supported around agroecology, you would see there that indeed agroecology is indeed a bankable solution. On top of growing evidence, there's also growing political momentum around agroecology. For years, agroecology was considered as a niche sector supported by civil society, grassroots movements, and academia. But today, it is entering the political mainstream and international arenas. Globally, for example, the three Rio Conventions refer to agroecology as an effective option for climate change and mitigation and adaptation, as well as improving biodiversity and sustainable land management. And also, as of March, for instance, this year, there are at least around 12 to 13 countries which have developed their national agroecology strategy or framework, and others are in the process of developing or validating their own. And this does not stop at the national level. At the sub-national levels, for example, regions like Sicily in Italy, Vaud in Switzerland, or in counties like Muronga and others in Kenya, they have developed their local versions of agroecology strategy. All these strategies and laws have been adopted since 2011, with most adopted and approved in the last 3 years. And of course, this does not include the many other examples of agroecology initiatives by civil society groups across, in different parts of the world. Now, what we're seeing here is that it reflects a growing political recognition that agroecology and this agroecology as a pathway for more resilient and sustainable, equitable systems. Currently, the sharp increases in energy, fertilizer, and food prices triggered by the ongoing conflict in Hormuz starkly illustrate the deep interconnections between geopolitical issues, food insecurity, and the fragility of food systems dependent on fossil fuels. This moment raises a bigger question for policymakers, for funders like Agri-PDBs, and practitioners. How can food systems become less exposed to geopolitical and fossil-based dependencies? The answer may lie on approaches like agroecology that strengthen local autonomy, reduces external inputs, and build resilience from the ground up. We now have this window of opportunity to further integrate agroecological solutions to ensure the sustainability and resilience that we've all been longing for. Thanks very much for your attention, and over to you, Sandra.
Thank you so much, Oliver. You are spot on with the timing. I was about to say to wrap up, but perfect. Again, brilliant presentation, and I imagine we will be able to get also the PowerPoints as well. I think this will be a really useful resource to reflect afterwards as well and share with attendees. Definitely myself would like to digest more. Right, so let's now move to the banks, and I think this is a good moment as well to bring the banks into the conversation and see what is their experience in terms of addressing the current food crisis and how they see their role in response, both in the short term, but I think what is also really crucial is the longer term. And as a first one, I would like to invite Ariana Nunez Cabrera, representing Banco Agricola from Dominican Republic. She's a coordinator at the IDB AFD Project Management Unit. And just as a brief introduction, so Banco Agricola is a state-owned bank supporting efforts to finance the agricultural sector, focusing on productivity, technology adoption, and food security. So please, the floor is yours, up to 10 minutes, please, or so. Thank you.
Thank you. Give me a minute. I'm sharing my screen.
All right. Let's see.
Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes, if you could put in a presentation mode, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, I'm into that. Just give me 1 minute, please. Okay. So, can you see my screen now?
Yes, I think it's fine. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so thank you. My name is Ariana Nunez. Good morning for all of you. I'm representing on behalf of Fernando Duran, which is the General Administrator. So the Banco Agrícola of the Dominican Republic would like to thank the organizers for the invitation to participate to this important webinar and for the role of the public development banks in the responding of the global crisis scenario. So Banco Agrícola was founded in 1945 and at the end of the Second World War. It's a agricultural bank of the Dominican Republic and is yeah, can
Sorry
you?
for interrupting. Could you please put the slides in the full screen? Can you please click display settings at the very top?
Let me see, how can I do it?
Yeah, you can see like three options up there. Displayed settings, the second one.
I think this one. Okay, can you see that now, my screen?
Just one moment.
No, Ariana, si vas a la pantalla que es oscura.
Okay, let me do it
No,
again. Okay. Creo que ahora sí. Okay, I think now you can see it.
sí, perfecto.
Yeah, this looks perfect. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It's clear now.
So as I was saying, it is a development financial institution, and it missions is to provide financial service to the agricultural and livestock to producers and the entire national territory. The Banco Agrícola is serving as a backbone of the country's agro-financial ecosystem for more than 8 decades. So it has like a long time. It covers the entire agri-food chain and also include production, livestock, rural infrastructure, and commercialization. In the Dominican Republic, it has operate with 65 branches, and it serves its location is distributed across the country, and it will give financial service to more than 200,000 farmers are the active clients that the bank has. The Dominican Republic has 48,000 kilometers. It's the total land, and the 51.5% of this land it's for agricultural and livestock uses. So more than the half of it's used for agricultural purpose. So Banco Agrícola is it's very important in the agricultural finances. The agricultural bank occupies the uniquely dominant position in the Dominican agrofinance. It's filling a critical gap left by the private sector institution. More than the 60% of the sector that finance agricultural, it's generated by Banco Agrícola. And it's making the primary source for credit to the Dominican producers. The commercial banks represent the 4%, according to the central bank data, of the total portfolio of the agricultural sector. It is reflecting on a structural market failure. Basically, Banco Agrícola is the one who covers all the finance needs that have the producers for credit to agricultural or any agricultural project. Cooperatives limit rich. The cooperatives contribute a small share of agricultural credits through the lack of scale and impact. And the impact observed in many of other Latin American countries. Informal credit has high cuts comparing to the interest that the Banco Agrícola has. The informal credit plays a significant role, but comes with a high adverse interest rate and conditions that are disproportionate for small and medium producers. Over the 80% of food consumed by the Dominicans is locally produced. This is important to highlight. So, below you will see different programs that the Dominican government have addressed of various moments of crisis over the recent years. So one of them is called Tasa Cero, or zero interest. It was a response after the COVID-19. The president of the Dominican Republic, Luis Abinader, recognized that the transformation of the Dominican agriculture requires sustaining financial commitment. So Banco Agrícola got a credit portfolio that grows over 80% during this administration, and it is reflecting a clear policy of priority for the Dominican Republic government. So after COVID-19, the government assigned a recovery fund that it was around 100 million pound. It was established to finance interest-free recovery loans for agricultural sectors, with a special emphasis of small producers hard hit by pandemic. After that, the full agro chain was covered, and Banco Agrícola financed the whole agro-food chain, including production, productivity, infrastructure, mechanization, processing, commercialization, warehouse, and factoring. And it ensures no critical links of the value chain that it's not founded by the Banco Agrícola. So after that, a recent event that also received that received backup from the government. It was after Hurricane Melissa. On October of 2025, the Dominican Republic was impacted by Hurricane Melissa, one of the strongest weather event of the hurricane season. Those are pictures, so you can see how it attacked the Dominican Republic. And one of the sector that was major impact was the agricultural sector. It was heavy rains and flooding caused with a significant damage to the national agricultural sector. And it loses a lot of rural road, disruption of affecting rural communities and the productivity of those areas, reporting all across different parts of the country. After that, the government also assigned a support of $33 million, and we give around 3,300 loans distributed all over the country for emergency after Hurricane Melissa, and there were more than 90,000 of people affected around the country by this situation. So with to help and to respond, the bank implemented an emergency responses that it was highly distributed. Within a record of 30 days, the entire fund was distributed to all over the country to the 3,300 agricultures that was impacted by the hurricane. Most of those sources were directly towards the main affected agricultural sectors, especially production, which received the largest impact and has a high importance of the national food security. This experience demonstrates that the Banco Agrícola operational capacity is a channel for emergency resources and effectively in the collocation to critical moments. It also highlights the importance of having a public financial institution with territorial presence, technical knowledge of the sector, and immediate response capacity. About the Persian Gulf crisis, it is the context of these international geopolitical tensions and global logistical disruption. It's associated with the Persian Gulf conflict and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. International fertilizer prices experienced significant increase. As a country that's important for agricultural inputs, the Dominican Republic faces considerable pressures on agricultural production costs. So in responses of that situation, the Dominican government implemented an approximately $80 million to subsidy the and stabilize local fertilizer prices, and to protect both than producers and customers. The government plan was, it will include different points. One of those points was the expansion of the state subsidy to absorb part of the international inflation impact. It was a temporary freeze in the local fertilizer prices. Coordination with important companies to prevent the immediate transfer of international prices increase to domestic producers. Inclusion of small and medium-sized important companies to guarantee broader and more equitable distribution. It was a prioritization of this rice sector due to the high dependence of nitrogen-based fertilizer. It's strategic important for the national consumption. Those measures help the immediate impact of the rising global prices of agricultural production costs and contribute to maintain the stability in the basic food basket. Thanks to this effective government intervention, the Banco Agrícola did not need to implement additional extraordinary measures directly related to the fertilizer financing. However, Banco Agrícola maintained its role of financial support and continuous sector monitoring to ensure that producers retain access to credit and operational liquid funds. So, the experience of the Dominican Republic demonstrated the public development banks played an essential role in this stabilization of food system during those crisis scenarios. It is a combination of counters financing, territorial presence, rapid execution and capacity, interinstitutional coordination, and also the government support. Make it possible to respond to effective changes of health, climate, and geopolitical crisis. For Banco Agrícola, it will continue strengthening its institutional capacity to protect national production, support rural producers, and contribute to the country food security. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ariana. Again, spot on the timing I was about to say. Thank you so much. This is really insightful. Again, the case, kind of how you work with the government in response to this kind of food crisis, and I think there's lots to learn for others as well. We have another case so we go to Africa now, and I would like to invite now Mr. Tom Keno, representing Agricultural Finance Corporation, which is a government development financial institution in Kenya, and Tom leads strategy and business development there, and we'll share experience from Kenya. So Tom, floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you for having me for this important session on the Agri-PDB platform, just for us to share experiences across the globe on how we can be able to navigate against these challenges that we normally encounter. So as Sandra said, I lead strategy and business development at Agricultural Finance Corporation, Kenya. And we are a development financial institution. And I think as my colleague from the Dominican Republic has said, we are the people who now are used as the last mile to ensure that we engage with smallholder farmers and the players in the agricultural sector. So maybe the next slide. Just to give you a picture of our institution, we are a government agency. Currently, we have some legal framework that has come into place. We are a government-owned enterprise since December last year. And this gives us an opportunity to operate as a limited liability company, as opposed to a government institution as we were previously. In terms of our mandate, we have a broad mandate of providing access to affordable credit to all players in the agricultural value chain. And we finance from production, processing, and also market. So we have a variety of loan products that we offer our clients. Our business model, we have what we call wholesale lending, and this is a way of giving the microfinance institutions, the SACCOs, and other digital credit providers and cooperatives and anchor clients. So we give them loans to on lend to their clients, and this has given us an opportunity to navigate around the issue of lack of collateral, which has been a challenge for our retail lending, especially to the people who require micro loans. So, and then of course, we also have the retail lending where we directly lend to our smallholder farmers, companies, and incorporated partnerships. We have a footprint of 6 regional offices and 47 branches spread all over the country. Our asset base is slightly shy of 108 USD million. And the biggest chunk of that asset base is our loan portfolio, which is around USD 96 million. Next slide. So coming to the area of focus in our today's discussion, when you are almost the last speaker, you find that most of the things that you are saying may have been alluded to by the previous speakers. I think Joseph mentioned quite a number of the challenges that we endure during such situations. We have been affected by the high cost of fuel and oil products. Of course, the supply of fertilizer has been a bit diminished. And of course, that means that the prices definitely will end up going up. And then the crisis has caused a spiral effect in other farm inputs. So you find that most of them also have to maybe be moved from one place to another. So the costs for the farmer is actually going up. We've also had some logistics disruptions as a result of the fuel shortages. Occasionally, we were having the fuels running out from the pump stations. So that definitely has an effect on us as a PDP, because a lot of our farmers move their produce from one place to the other. And also we use fuel for purposes of production. Another challenge that we foresee, because our season has already started for maize and wheat, we are likely to experience a compromised application of fertilizer due to the shortage. So you may find that the farmers may not apply the right quantities for their planting season. And we also already foresee lower yields in the next season, which will actually be an implication of what is happening now. We experienced also foreign exchange volatility just as a result of the crisis. And I think Joseph also mentioned the issue of food price in inflation. So that is something that we are also experiencing from our end. What has the government and ourselves done just to mitigate this? Recently, in fact, the beginning of last month, the government was able to reduce the value-added tax on petroleum by 8%, at least just to stabilize the impact of the fuel cost. So I think this one cushioned the farmers and of course all the citizens on that effect. And then again, given that we are starting our planting season, the government has also done a subsidy on our fertilizer. Of course, we love to contend with the quantities because they are lower as a result of the crisis, but at least the farmers can be able to access the fertilizer at about USD 19. Then the other thing that the Ministry of Agriculture is doing is just to try and encourage the use of organic fertilizer as an alternative, just to mitigate this, so that we try to figure out alternatives in the long term. As we speak, I am a very happy man because today we received an allocation of USD 7.7 million. It actually landed in our bank account today. So you help me celebrate this milestone because it's going to support us in actually cushioning our MSMEs in terms of just getting inputs in good time and providing access to funding. Of course, we've had some of our clients approach us for restructuring of their loans because of the effect of what is happening. So we normally look at these on case by case, and where possible, we give them some leeway just to ensure that they are able to operate sustainably. Then, of course, in terms of impact and outcome, we are actually experiencing high prices for fuel. And I'm sure if this continues on, at some point, maybe the government may not be able to subsidize anymore. So that impact can be very, very high. Currently, the fuel price is around USD 1.5 per liter for the diesel, which is what is used so much by our farmers and processors for production. With the subsidy, we pray that the farmers will be able to access the fertilizers cheaply so that they can be able to plant. And then, of course, we rely so much on import. So with the government trying to sensitize us to use alternative of fertilizer, I think this is something in the long run will be able to help us in situations like this. And of course, with the addition of funding, we as a PDB are able to deploy funds to our MSMEs in a timely manner so that they can be able to conduct their agri business in this space. Next slide. Just to share some interventions that again is happening. As an institution, to date, we have disbursed about USD 31 million to our farmers in different value chains, just to support them in the financial gaps that they have. The government is very active in just giving advisory information or services. That is through the county governments and also the national government. This is being coordinated from the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock, just to enable them embrace alternative ways of maybe applying fertilizer and trying to influence them to go organic. And I think that is something that is continuous, even in the absence of the crisis. And then, of course, we are having a collaborative approach where government agencies, development partners, and private sector have come together just to figure out how we can be able to navigate the impact of this crisis. As you may be aware, the African Forward Summit was held in Nairobi, Kenya. It ended yesterday. And some of the conversations that we were looking at are around how we can be able to navigate around these crises. And for us as a PDP, financial inclusion was something that was very fundamental. The government is also trying to stock the strategic grain reserve by buying maize and beans from smallholder farmers, and of course also ensuring that there are enough stocks of fertilizer for all our smallholder farmers. And then lastly, the government has been having a registration program through the Kenya Integrated Agricultural Management Information System. And to date, we have about 8 million farmers who have been registered. And of course, with this kind of data, we are able to establish the quantities of inputs that the farmers will require, and also facilitate distribution to all of them to the last mile. So, Sandra, that is my contribution to the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Congratulations on receiving more funds. So that's great. And again, another great story on how you're responding. I think I particularly like the kind of transition and prospect of moving towards the organic fertilizer production, which aligns with also what Agroecology Coalition is advocating for, and more the kind of sustainable systems what we try to develop here. Right, we are getting nearer the end of this excellent webinar. So what we're going to do now is really do a quick poll which includes 3 questions, very brief questions, where we'd invite everyone to answer. So it's, again, don't take too much time, but really you should be able to see now on your screens. And just, please respond. So one is about really what are the key challenges for PDBs responding effectively in the current crisis. The second one is about how does your PDB primarily coordinate with public and international partners? So it's really where's the kind of coordination happening, or maybe it is not happening as much as we probably need. And the third one is really about what's your perception of agroecology as a long-term transformative strategy, and to what extent your PDB is thinking about it. So we will see results very shortly. But whilst you're doing that, I also wanted to already open up the final part, Q&A, and use this time to have some questions from the audience. And maybe I would now invite one of the IFAD colleagues to pick some of the questions what we saw in the Q&A box.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. Maybe we can start with the one from Kenya. It says, how is Kenya preparing its agricultural sector to become more resilient against future global supply and fertilizer shocks? Thank you.
Tom, would you like to maybe come on this one?
Sorry, you can hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I think what the government is doing is to using a multi-sector approach, whereby we are looking at what the Ministry of Agriculture are looking at in terms of demand. The Ministry of Trade are actually tasked with ensuring that we are able to import enough fertilizer so to support the needs, especially as I indicated, we are in a planting season. And then of course we are also looking at an alternative of unlocking the arid and semi-arid areas, which we have established that we have a lot of fertile soils there, but because they are arid, so the government is looking at a way of ensuring that we can have irrigation in these zones, so that we can also minimize the use of the fertilizer and take advantage of the fertility of these areas that are otherwise classified as arid and semi-arid. In fact, currently in the country, we are having the long rain seasons, and we normally get some bumper harvest from these areas which ordinarily we look at as not really good for agriculture. So those are some of just the initiatives that are underway, and they are long-term. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We have another question in the chat that says, are current global food systems resilient enough to withstand multiple shocks happening at the same time?
Who would from the panelists would like to answer this one? Have a go.
Hi, this is Joe Glauber. Yeah, I would say, thus far they have been, which is remarkable. I mean, it's quite remarkable. I look back at even with the COVID crisis, which was a very disruptive, that surprisingly the systems were able to accommodate these stresses. Now, that wasn't true for everyone, and I think that's the concern, is how to meet the most vulnerable. We know, that those created even more problems for in those areas that are currently suffering from malnutrition and other things. But at least particularly in terms of the agricultural markets, the disruption that we saw in 2022 with the closure of grain coming out of the Black Sea, we were able to find grain from all over the world responding to high prices. I think the key was flexibility, that countries were able to move and import from other countries. You look at various countries like Egypt were able to secure supplies. Now, the world can only take so much, however, and I think that when we say multi-breadbasket failures and those sorts of things, I think that it does present real problems. But again, where we run into problems typically is when governments come in and with the idea of helping their own population, which is very understandable, how that can further intensify price impacts for everyone else. And we saw that with export restrictions on grains. We see that with current export restrictions on things like fertilizer inputs, and that can be very, very dangerous. So let me just stop there.
Share the results now. Fantastic. We have another question posed more to Banco Agricola, which looks at what is the percentage of interest on services, equipment, and inputs as of current. Ariana.
Carola, would you like to sorry,
Ariana.
Sorry, Ariana, would you like to come in, please? Apologies.
Okay.
She's not.
Okay, maybe Sandra, just to give a perspective from our side based on the same question. In AFC, we charge 10% for the retail loans and 8% for the wholesale loans. And then we have the sugar development levy fund that we administer, which we normally give our clients loans at 5%. So maybe just to compare with the other side for purposes of information. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Maybe also, if I can come in now from my end, I just wanted to ask, maybe that is also the kind of question, the open question to the panelists. But really, so what would be the kind of the key bottlenecks, I guess, to advance change? And maybe I wonder, maybe Oliver can come in on that, observing also especially more this kind of transformative change. What are the kind of the key bottlenecks around either the policies or institutions, and especially like with the public development banks, to really accelerate that focus on investing in more sustainable agriculture practices, and or if you turn it around, how we can accelerate. So what kind of actions we would need to take to really accelerate more investment in this more sustainable agriculture. So yeah, Oliver or anyone else.
Yeah, no, thanks very much. I mean, there are a few barriers, I think, to this one. One is really access to resources. So we've heard it earlier. Accessing these resources, be it organic inputs or technical expertise, especially in resource-limited countries, can be challenging for farmers, particularly due to constraints like limited credit, market access, and infrastructure. Second is market demand and infrastructure. Many conventional markets and supply chains are designed mainly for large scale, and standardized production may not readily accommodate diverse small scale agroecological systems. So that is another one. Another element also is that perception of risks during transition phase. The initial costs and financial uncertainties related to transitioning to sustainable approaches like agroecology can dissuade farmers, especially those with limited resources. And I think with these three issues where PDBs could really come in terms of making sure that they're able to offer financing instruments that are really catering to needs of the farmers, particularly the smallholders, in terms of facilitating direct access to market, very soft and concessional loans, having stupidly simple mechanisms to allow those, because sometimes for farmers to access credit or guarantee schemes, they need to fill in multiple types of applications, which are really complicated for them to understand, right? So I think those are some of the things that can be fixed. But also on some other areas, I think it's important to invest also in terms of research, knowledge management, because if you look at the current investments in terms of research in agroecology, I mean, it's increasing, but it is not as high as what we could see in traditional agriculture. Many of the big investments around research in agriculture is really focusing more on crops and commodities, whereas we should really be moving towards more landscape approach and agroecological approaches. Of course, there are issues around policy and institutional support, offering support for and promoting subsidies more are geared towards external inputs. If only the level of funding that is or support that is allocated or subsidies that's allocated to chemical fertilizers and pesticides are rechanneled, or at least the same level of resources and subsidies are invested in agroecological and organic farming, for instance, I mean, we could really see that this will really, really go a long way. And as IFAD already demonstrated, these agroecological approaches are really bankable investments. And I mean, from IFAD side, you have this portfolio of projects that proves this case. Over.
Thank you so much. Anyone else on this point to contribute? All right. Do we have any other questions? Marlita, maybe from the Q&A box or?
Yes, we have one more. I think we can use this to wrap it up. It's what is the most sustainable long-term solution to reduce agricultural dependence on import inputs?
I think the answer starts with letter A, but I leave you guys to respond.
Yeah, anyone else from the panelists would like to have a go at this one?
Yeah, I'll have a go. I think, many of you are too young, but in 1973, the world had a huge oil shock crisis, and it provided us with very structural changes, especially in the use of energy and how we we saw interdependencies. It also brought to the world stagflation. And I think we are at a turning point with this crisis that might also provide a structural change. So I think, over-reliance on one logistical corridor, over-reliance on one product to increase productivity has never been a good idea in the long run. And I think that's what we're about to learn as well. So I think, the solution, could be agroecology for sure. But the way we understand our food systems and over-reliance on anything, one variable, will sure made us think about how we see the global interconnectedness of things.
Thank you so much. I think we are close to now the end of this webinar. I think we could all probably go for another hour talking, but yeah, I'll now pass it on to IFAD colleagues to wrap up and conclude. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. I think it's been a very insightful webinar and well thought out. Due to time, we might not be able to answer all the questions, but we remain available via email. I would like to thank, on behalf of the Agri-PDB Platform, the senior management of IFAD for the extensive support for the platform and also the initiatives under PDBs, and also the holistic approach that Kenya has given Banco Agricola. We have so many PDBs that attended today, and we really appreciate their insights as well. I have a list of more than 50 PDBs today, so it's really amazing to see all this participation. And I think in conclusion, just all the holistic approach that Joseph has given and everybody else, we sincerely thank you. And I think the closing statement will be agricultural PDBs are at the forefront of this access to finance and also mobilizing during times of crisis. So we thank you for your time and attention and hope to see you in the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you for having us.